Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled that you are with us this evening. My name is Eva McCann. I'm a national politics reporter at CNN, and on behalf of the NABJ and NABJ Political Task Force, we are so glad that you could be with us tonight for Expand Your Reach, How to Land and Make the Most of TV and Radio Hits, presented by the NABJ Political Task Force under the leadership of Tia Mitchell. Why don't we begin with a quick audience poll? That question is, what describes the type of journalist you are? You could just answer that poll quickly so we can get a sense of who is in the room tonight. Once that's completed, we can move on. And it looks like we have a good mix this evening. Newspaper and magazine, 14% of you. Television, 36% of you. Digital and online, 27% of you. Radio and podcast, 14%, and then 9% in other professions. So awesome, that's what we like to see. And actually that diversity in terms of experience is reflected in our panel this evening. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce this awesome panel. Let me first start with Tolu Olorunipa. He is a reporter for the Washington Post and a CNN political analyst. He studied sociology at Stanford University, and he lives right here in the nation's capital and is writing a book about George Floyd. Thank you, Tolu. Tolu, you can wave to our audience. Next up, we've got Kimberly Brown, and Kim is a producer on CNN's Inside Politics with John King. That's a daily news program that runs in the noon hour on the network. She previously worked at CBS News as a Capitol Hill producer, running around the halls of Congress, and she is a graduate of Hampton University. Next up, Nicole Killian. She is a congressional correspondent for CBS News. She covered the 2020 campaign and reports for the network's various platforms, including CBS Mornings, CBS Evening News, and their streaming service, CBSN. She previously worked for Hearst Television and has made several local news stops along the way. She is a graduate of Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. And Shanta Covington is a planning editor for The Takeaway at WNYC, the NPR affiliate in New York City. She previously worked in talk and cable news television for close to 20 years. And she is a graduate of Newhouse, like me, at Syracuse University. So we've got folks in radio and television and lots of backgrounds represented this evening. Are we going to do yes, let's go ahead and do that second poll question. That second poll question is, what types of opportunities are you looking for to expand your reach? I'm going to give our audience a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, so most of you are here for television opportunities. 77% of you looking to get some exposure on national television and cable news. Others in the streaming platform, national radio, 41%, podcast, 32%, and then 9% are looking for other opportunities. Good to know as we begin our panel. So I want to start with the first question here. I'm going to begin asking Kimberly our first question. Kim, when producing a show, what kind of content are you looking for? Kim produces a daily hour on CNN. This is a news panel type of program. What are you looking for when you are producing Inside Politics?
We're always looking for the top news of the day, whatever the big headlines are. But when we have panelists on, we're really looking for someone to bring something unique to the table. And that's one thing that I think is really important for young reporters and journalists who want to be on a panel. Try to find something that we're not going to find in the top, headlines of the newspaper, or that one of our, national correspondents that's already working for, our organization will have. So I think that we're always looking for something very specific that we can have on the show. And we're always looking for someone who is a dynamic person that has good personality, and can bring good energy to the table.
Awesome, awesome. So energy, something different. What about you, Shanta? When you are putting together programs on WNYC, how can reporters who would like to be a guest get on your show and get on your radar?
Sure. So it's a multi-level process. So the first thing, and I will echo what Kim said, is that we're definitely looking for unique perspectives, a little bit more nuanced than what we see on the daily grind as far as like stories are concerned. And if you're really looking to get on our show, I would suggest a couple of things. First of all, if a producer reaches out to you, do get back to them. We realize that you, like ourselves, are working on deadline, but the sooner you get back to us, the sooner we can assess if you are right for the program. The second thing is a lot of producers who I give assignments out to will go through your PR departments. If you are not friends with the people in your PR department, if you so happen to be lucky to have one, definitely do that, because a lot of time they are the first people that my producers will go to actually get in touch with you. And if you do have a unique story coming out, and again, uniqueness and nuance and sort of changing up the perspective is what we're looking for, reach out to those producers who you have established those relationships with and continue those relationships. So when you want something to have a buzz, or if you want to get on a program, they should be your first line of contact, say, if you don't have a PR department. So I would say it's a multi-level process, and each of those steps really kind of will ensure that you can get on air as long as you maintain those good relationships, both with the reporters and producers that reach out to you, as well as your PR department.
So Shanta, it sounds like you don't have to wait. Reporters don't have to wait for someone to reach out to them. They can be really proactive. If they know they've got a great scoop coming or a great story, they can reach out to folks on your team first.
Yeah, absolutely. For my team, sometimes they'll know about the story before the story comes out, because the producer will have not tipped them off, but will say, hey, I got a great piece coming out tomorrow on McConnell or Schumer or whomever it is. And because they've already contacted us, we can then pitch it to our team. They can pitch it to us, and we already have sort of what we feel like is a legs up. And we can go ahead and say, I know this piece is coming out tomorrow, or it's going to, hit the headlines in a couple of days, national news. This person is great. We've had them on our show before. So let's go ahead and see if we can get them on.
Tolu, tell me, explain your career trajectory and how you wound up in your current role. People probably look up and see you on CNN all of the time and are interested to know a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I want to echo what Kimberly and Shanta said about one, sort of being proactive, and also sort of, trying to bring something different to the table when it comes to TV. I'm a print journalist. I, come from a newspaper background. So TV has always been kind of a new and a little bit of out of body experience for me, because I'm used to kind of being, off camera and typing out leads and doing stories. So I started off, I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I started off working for my local newspaper, the Tallahassee Democrat. And, over the next decade, I worked at newspapers from Georgia to Miami to DC and out in California when I was in school. And, I just sort of was always doing local print reporting. And that's really where I found a lot of, excitement. That's where I love doing. But, we live in a very, a world where, there's not as much of a delineation between the different media platforms. You could be a print journalist, but you're also expected to do podcasts and do TV. So as time went on, I found that, I wasn't being as proactive as I probably should have been, but, the kind of journalism that I was doing led to, I was fortunate to have a very good PR department when I went to Bloomberg News, and they really were proactive about trying to get me in front of producers and get me on shows. Bloomberg happened to have its own TV show as well, or its own TV channel as well. So that was where I first kind of got my first experience doing TV. It was actually after the protests after the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson in 2014. So sometimes, a big story or a big breaking news story can be the moment where you're kind of thrust in front of the spotlight, and you kind of have to be able to deliver. And I think that's really what led to other opportunities that came along the line, me doing more Bloomberg TV, and then my PR person at Bloomberg really being proactive about getting me on CNN and MSNBC as a White House reporter. And it just so happened that, the last two presidents before this one were, pretty, dynamic presidents who led to a lot of White House reporters being on TV and being called on TV and on podcasts to talk about the role of the White House press corps. And that's one of the reasons I was able to kind of get that exposure, was just sort of the news cycle. There was so much news over the past 5+ years that, there was a hunger to get people who are in the White House, people who are reporting about, especially over the past 4 years, before the current administration, sort of the craziness that was going on in the White House. It was must-see TV for, reasons good and bad. And that was the time in which I ended up doing a lot more TV. So that's how I ended up working at CNN and doing what I've been doing for the past 3 years.
Thank you, Tolu. And I want to bring Nicole into the conversation now. Nicole, tell me a little bit about your background. The Hill is such a coveted beat. So many people want to be a congressional correspondent, but this did not happen overnight. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So I think, my journey obviously is a little different because by default, I am in TV, have been since day one. So it's just part of my DNA in terms of what I do. As far as getting to the Hill, it just took a lot of shoe leather reporting and persistence, quite frankly, which we know everybody has to have in this industry. I started my career at NBC News. I actually started off behind the scenes, off camera, because I didn't necessarily want to do the whole small market route. Those of you in TV know, typically you've got to start at a small station, go to a medium station, large station, and then, you get to the network. But really the game has changed now. And so I think that's what's so useful about this panel, is because everything has become cross-platform. It does allow for greater opportunities, no matter your background, whether you are interested in television or radio or print or digital. So from that standpoint, my journey is a little more traditional in the sense that eventually I did take that small market to medium market to large market route, starting off in Hagerstown, working in DC at a local station, and then eventually moving to a national platform when I got to Hearst Television, where I covered national news and politics for their 24+ stations. And then I moved on to CBS, working for their affiliate news service, NewsPath, and then have been with the network side probably for the better part of 3 years now. And what I can say is once you do reach the network level, I think it's important to be cognizant of also how the broadcast industry has changed. Traditionally, it was all about trying to get on the evening news or trying to get on morning television. But now, for instance, at CBS, we've got streaming network, which is now called CBS News Streaming Network. I just relaunched this week. In addition to our broadcast shows, we also have CBS News Radio. We also have CBS Interactive. We also have various podcasts. So there's so many different platforms. And so that did for me, as far as ultimately reaching the network, was something that provided greater opportunity and platforms for my own reporting, because traditionally, especially those of you who've come up in local news, you're turning a package for the 4, the 5, the 6, a VOSAT, for this show or for that. You're going to, this assignment and that assignment. And even with Hearst Television, while I did do various reports for stations across the country, again, it was pretty much that linear model where I was strictly doing television for certain shows. But again, at CBS, because we have such a diverse array of platforms, as most networks do these days, again, it does provide different opportunities where you do have to be very fluid about how you tell your stories. How I tell a story for evening news is different than how I would do it for CBS mornings, is different than how I would do it for our streaming network, because they're all different entities in and of themselves. So I do think that's something to be cognizant of, especially for those who aspire to be at the network level as a broadcast journalist, or if you are making that transition from being on the print side or digital side into a television network.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Kim and Shanta, I also want you guys to tell us a little bit about your background as well and how you got to where you are. But we don't have much time, so just 30 seconds apiece so we can move on and get some other questions in. Kim, tell us how you got to CNN, just about 30 seconds.
I started the local news route, like Nicole mentioned. So I started in a small market on Salisbury, Maryland. After that, I was lucky enough to be able to come to DC, and I worked for News Channel 8. And I transitioned over to ABC in this area. Then Fox 5, I was a line producer there for about 5 years. And from there, I went to CBS News. I started at NewsPath, transitioned over to CBS News, and then on the Hill. And from there, I went to CNN.
Wow. And Shanta, what about your journey?
Sure. So I might be one of the older people in the room, so I will keep it as brief as I can. I worked in TV for the better portion of 20 years. Wow. So I've been a little bit everywhere. I've been CNN, I've been MSNBC, I've been at PBS, I've been at Court TV at one point, but we don't need to talk about that. And then I sort of was like, I want to do a little bit different. And then this lovely radio gig came up for the takeaway at WNYC. And really, I want to just stress this point. I went from TV to radio, and I want a lot of people to know that you can actually transfer your skills from one to the other. So if you're primarily thinking TV, don't leave out radio, because the skills that you have for one can definitely apply to the other. So that's the very short 20-year trajectory that I've been on.
I don't know if Venice Toussaint of Becoming Storytellers is in this forum tonight, but if she is, she would say that you all are dropping gems. And I hope everybody is taking notes, because it's some really good stuff. Tolu, I want to ask you, how did you land your CNN contract? What tips do you have for being the type of guest that can land a contract? It's one thing to be on, it's one thing to have a paid contributor contract.
Yeah, my most important tip would just be to say yes to as many opportunities as possible. I started doing TV and radio without sort of knowing what the end game would be. I just, was in the mode of, if people wanted to hear from me about what I'm writing about in the newspaper, then I'm happy to talk about it, even if it's a small podcast or a small, online streaming opportunity. And those gave a lot of opportunities to do practice. And so, like I said before, I had a really, really proactive PR official that helped to put me in touch with some of the shows like Inside Politics. And I just started doing some of those shows and, ended up getting in touch with a lot of the producers, and the producers will be your best friend if you want to get a contract, because they are smart. They know what's happening behind the scenes, and they'll advocate for you. So I was lucky to be in touch with some really good producers. And over the course of about a year of doing TV, just saying yes to everything and not getting paid. CNN decided that they wanted to have me exclusively, and that meant I would have to stop doing other shows, but then I would also, get some payment for that exclusivity. And it ended up working out, because I love doing CNN, and it just ended up being a really good deal. And, my primary employer, the Washington Post, was happy to do it. They're happy to have their journalists on TV talking about what they're writing about in the paper. So that's really how it all came together. And it's been a really good system so far.
So it sounds like Tolu has been doing for years, again, not overnight, a lot of relationship building in order to get to a point to be offered a contract. Thank you, Tolu. Nicole.
Eva, can I jump in really quickly?
Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to piggyback off of what Tolu said about producers. Producers are the gateway to be on these shows. And it's really important to be, a good, to use producers as a good resource. Keep in contact with them, find out what it takes to get on a show. When you're on a show, ask them for feedback, because a lot of times, even though the anchors, they do sign off on the final panelists or whoever's on the show, the producers, we really do work hard on trying to make sure that we have the right set of people for the right topics. And as long as we know that you're really interested, that you're doing a great job, that you have special stories or a unique or a different take on a story, then we're going to always be your best advocate to get you on the air versus maybe your publicist or trying to get on the show on your own. So definitely use producers as a resource.
And can I add one thing to that? Because
yes.
Kim was just dropping all the gems there. What I will also say is I have given this advice for the last 20 plus years to any producer that I work with. I will not put anyone on a show if I haven't spoken with you. If a producer reaches out to you and says, hey, do you have just 5 minutes to chat with me? Because even though in print, your story may look wonderful, it may read great, it may be the exact perspective that the show wants, a producer still needs to hear you, whether it be on TV or whether it be on radio. We need to know that you can hold a conversation. We need to know that you can express your points and synthesize them and actually deliver them to the audience. In radio, we have a little bit more time, but I know in TV, that minute goes fast. Those 5 minutes go fast. So if a producer reaches out to you, I know you're on deadline, we're on deadline as well. Take the time to have the conversation because it could be the difference of you getting on air or not.
Excellent, excellent. And Kim, tell us, if you just had to reflect on the last few days of panels, are there certain topics or certain reporters that make the best guests? Is there someone, that recently said something particularly profound or that did something that you're like, that is exactly what we're looking for?
I think that we have so many really great dynamic guests. It's really hard to pinpoint one person in particular, but I do think that we do really try to find panelists that work well together. So if we know that two people have very laid back personalities, we're typically not going to have them on a panel together. Or if we know that, Eva is very, very, very interested in, congressional politics, and we know that she's going to push back if someone says something that, may not be the best, we're going to bring her onto our panel. So that's typically how we try to structure who comes on. And then also, I think that, if you know that you're going to be coming on a show, like we mentioned earlier, reach out to the producer 2 or 3 days ahead of time and say, I have this really exclusive interview, or I've been covering this particular delegation. And that way we know that you're going to be a good person for this topic. We know we're going to come to you first on this panel, or maybe we save you for next week or, 2 or 3 days from now.
Good gem there. Good gem there. I just want to remind folks that we have a Q&A box so that if you want to drop a question in that Q&A box, you can do so. And we'll hope to get to many of those questions at the end of the forum this evening. Nicole, how do you maximize your television appearances? I know that you spent your whole career in television, but for folks that may not have, may get asked on, once a week or once a month, how do they maximize that exposure?
Well, I would first just start off by saying, in terms of maximizing your experience, again, to the point I made earlier, if you are fortunate enough to get into a network space, whether that's CBS, CNN, NBC, ABC, again, which all have, in addition to their broadcast elements, streaming elements. Again, I think it's about understanding each network and how they're structured, because equally, just because I'm at CBS doesn't mean I'm guaranteed a spot on the show, right? So I have to pitch just like I would anywhere else. And to the points that were made earlier, especially by the producers, that's who I'm pitching to, are the producers. So internally, it's the stories that we're working on too. It's the interviews that we're doing too. And so it's also understanding how things will play. For instance, with CBS Mornings, I know that there's more real estate there because it's a 2-hour show versus, CBS Evening News, which is a 22-minute show, technically speaking, to streaming, which for the most part is endless. So what I mean by that is that in terms of pitching myself, I have to know, okay, if I pitch something to the show, where is it going to land best? So when I say maximize your appearances, it's also kind of maximizing your editorial strength too, because there's some things I know, hey, maybe the broadcast shows may not have time for this, but this could be a great 5-minute segment on our streaming network, or vice versa, so that is number one. I think know your platform, know the shows. And that way, just like how if you're applying for a job, you've got to tailor your pitch and you've got to tailor your resume and tailor your cover letter. Similarly, when you're reaching out to networks or reaching out to shows, you want to be able to tailor your pitch. And also, don't forget, even if you're on the local level, there's lots of, local public affairs shows. And, to Toulouse's point, I know everybody wants the big fancy lights of being at CNN or being at MSNBC, but, as we've mentioned, it is all a path. So for instance, if you're a local news reporter in a local news market, make sure you're familiar with the radio stations in your market. Let's say if you work for a local station, or again, even within your station, if you've got a public affairs show that runs on the weekend or something, that is another way to pitch yourself out. So in addition to whatever you may do in your day-to-day as far as your stories, you might want to pitch those shows in your own markets to try to get on the air, at least as a bridge. And again, the more practice you get, then that kind of will allow you that space and that buzz that may interest a producer on a national level.
Nicole said something really key. Just because you are at the network, working for the network, or an analyst with the network, that doesn't mean that you get to stop pitching. You're always pitching. It's always a competitive environment. So that was really, really key takeaway from Nicole's point there. Thank you, Nicole. This might be a good question for Shanta. For those who aren't broadcast journalists by trade, how do you look the part? How should you dress, makeup, lighting at home set, different things like that if you're trying to make an entry into this field?
Well, being in radio right now, we don't have to worry about that. My guests can join us from home in their pajamas for all we care, but we definitely want to make sure that your audio sounds very crystal clear. So we have a wonderful team at The Takeaway who will make sure that you sound your best no matter what. Literally, some people are sometimes like leaning in so close to their computers, they feel like they're kissing them. But trust me, listen to the control room crew. They definitely know what to help you with and to make you sound your best. But I can offer a few tips for TV, seeing that I did do that for so long. And then I'll throw to Kim, because I'm sure she probably has way more to say about that, being in it currently. For TV, I was never really interested in how people looked per se. I definitely say, as my mom always says, be presentable, don't embarrass me, make sure you have, yourself together when you go out there. And I think the same thing applies when you go on to TV. Business casual, professional, don't show up in sweatpants or all the things that you can wear for radio. And most TV networks will have makeup. So definitely, if you know what makeup you like, communicate that to the makeup artist, because they do not and are not able to read minds, but they will make you look your best. What I will say for either radio or TV, it's not, again, about how you look, it's about how you sound. And it's not a sound quality that I'm talking about. It's about being able to get your points out effectively, synthesizing them, and not only doing it, say if it's a one-on-one hit between you and the host, that is one sort of level, right? The next level is when you're on a panel. You not only need to be able to play nice in that field when you're on a panel, you also need to be able to listen to what your other fellow panelists are saying and either complement the conversation, or what you need to do is to be able to bring up something different than what you've heard your other fellow panelists say. So I will say, keep it professional. Business casual is fine as far as your appearance, but really focus on the message and what you're delivering when you're on air. But I'm sure Kim has a couple more things to say on that.
I would definitely second the points about making sure that you're distinct from everybody else that's going to be on the panel, or even if you're doing a one-on-one with an anchor. But in terms of looking the part, if you've never done a lot of television, or maybe you've done some in the past, maybe in college, I would just say take the time to videotape yourself when you're doing a story, whether it's, on local TV or local radio, newspaper, whatever it may be, and actually get a chance to see like what you sound like, what you look like. And from there, small grooming changes you can make on your own and get feedback that way. If you like to do videos on Instagram, this time make it a news video and see how many likes you get. And from there, maybe that's something you can continue to practice on. I think a lot of times, especially if you're coming from newspaper or magazine background. Again, like the stories don't necessarily translate to TV. So just getting a sense of like how you sound, how quickly you can get your point across, all those things matter. And the grooming will come with that as well.
I'm just going to lay out the 101 as the TV journalist in the group. I mean, primary colors work best on television, no patterns, red, blue, yellow typically are strongest, green, although you have to be careful of your backdrop. You don't want to wear green behind any kind of green screen. I would not wear like big hoop earrings, don't make your jewelry a distraction. Yes, it's about who you are and the points, but you will get that random email from, somebody somewhere saying you had hair out of place, or what was that you were wearing, or potentially trying to sell you on some wardrobe changes. So whether that's jewelry or clothing or the like. So people are always watching from that standpoint. And again, on a network level, yes, you'll get all of the bells and whistles, but you also, if you don't have that luxury, simply be prepared to do that yourself. And I would say whether you're female or male, always have some powder or blotting paper, because especially on TV, you can get shiny. And so especially with the bright lights, or even if you're at home, that is something I think to be mindful of. Also, I would say in terms of your setup, especially these days, I think now because of COVID, a lot of the technical barriers have been broken down. So you can now do things from the comfort of your home if you so choose, depending on the show. You don't always have to come in and be on set or go to a studio. That used to be kind of the way they used to do things. But again, with COVID now, it's become more acceptable to join via Zoom or WebEx or Google Chat, whatever the platform might be. So I would also encourage you to be familiar with those platforms if you're not already, and also if you haven't already done so, you might want to invest in a ring light. I'm sure most people have that by now, but that is, a light that you can use with your computer or mobile device, which will also help. And in terms of your background, I'm not going to go room rater on you, but the bottom line is in your shot to the best extent possible. Certainly, everybody's familiar with the bookcases and the bookshelves, but if you can give yourself some depth in a room, that always helps. And if you're in a tiny apartment and maybe don't have that luxury, corner shot like Kimberly's beautiful corner shot, as I'm looking at it, is a good strategy, just to kind of have the right angle, making sure the camera is at eye level as opposed to up or down. You never want to look like you're looking up at something or looking down at something. So those are just some kind of like basic 101 tips. I would also just say too, if you've never done one of these hits before, I think it's just important to remember just the general practice, which is usually the way you are going to hear somebody is through an earpiece. So whether you're on set with somebody, or if you're from the comfort of your own home, or if you're going to some kind of remote location like a studio, or let's say you're on Capitol Hill and you're going to some stand-up location, you'll get an earpiece. And so that can be new for people sometimes, but that's just something to be mindful of as well, because that's how producer is going to communicate with you to tell you need to wrap things up or you need to go long. And so sometimes that can be a distraction for the first time when you're hearing it in your ear, but that's kind of like the basic way a hit, if you will run.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Tolu, I think we can combine. I was going to ask you what you would suggest for other journalists who want to land hits and keep getting asked back. And I think we can combine that with a question from Darlene Superville is with us tonight from the Associated Press, White House correspondent. And she asked, what are some tips for finding out who the booking producer is at a particular television or a radio show? What would you say to that?
Those are both really good questions. I'll try to get through them relatively quickly. I think, like everyone has said, experience and practice is key. I came into the TV world from a print, from a lack of experience from being in print, and practicing as much as you can, even in small, low risk opportunities. Like in front of your own streaming platform, or in front of your own camera, or just in the comfort of your own home, or in a smaller local market. If you have to make mistakes, it's much easier to make mistakes in front of a few people or just in front of yourself, rather than, once you're on a national platform. So taking as many opportunities as you can to do public speaking, to talk on camera, to learn sort of how to make your points in a succinct and dynamic way. Doing it in practice it can be a big help in terms of trying to figure out how to do it on a national level. And when you do get on national TV, you're less nervous when you've done it before, when you've practiced a lot. In terms of trying to get in touch with the booking producers, Kimberly may be able to give a little bit more information about this, but definitely if you have someone who manages publicity at your outlet, if you're fortunate to have that, talk to them, take them out for coffee, tell them that you're interested in doing TV. They have a lot of the contacts. They have a lot of people that they know within the industry that can help you get on air. They know who's looking for new talent. They know who's looking for a fresh face, and they know how to make those calls and those contacts. Short of that, if you don't have that, it's a world in which we don't always have that opportunity. Feel free to be proactive and find people on LinkedIn, or find people through your own network. Sometimes someone who knows someone who may be able to make that introduction to you. And it's not always about pitching yourself for a show right now. Sometimes it's about building that relationship and just saying, I want to know what you do. I want you to know that I'm here and that I'm a new reporter, or I'm someone who's interested in making that transition into TV. Let me know what you're interested in, and offering yourself as an asset to producers who are often looking for people who bring something new to the table. So sometimes it's about having that introduction, and not always having it be about I have a story and I want to be on TV right away. Just sort of building that relationship, and then from there, sometimes weeks or months down the line, you get a phone call from that person and they're looking for someone just like you. And that's how.
Or years down the line.
Right. It can be a long game, but it definitely pays off in the end.
Yes. Such good advice there from Tolu. You don't want to be reaching out to people when you need something. Networking is about, building relationships sometimes over years. In my career, I've met people years ago, and they are only now, are there connections being made in terms of a professional opportunity? So you just never know. Let's go, because I think we're overlapping with some of these questions. So I'm going to go to Matt Brown. I think Matt is with USA Today. I'm guessing. I'm pretty sure, but I see him in the chat box, and he asked, what is the best way, or how do you preview, this is a good one, how do you preview a potential major story you have coming without giving away the scoop? Kim.
That's a really good question. So let's say you already have an established relationship with a booking producer or a producer. And let's say a few days ahead of time before the story launches, definitely start to send emails or text messages or however you communicate, and let them know, I had this great story. I've interviewed A, B, and C. And this is like the general gist, 3-4 sentences. And then say, once it goes live for whatever organization you work for, I can send you the link. I mean, I think that's probably the best way to do it without, scooping your own, company. But definitely at least 2 or 3 days ahead of time before it comes out to say, hey, keep this under the radar, but I think this would be a really good story, and I want to be able to come onto your show and talk about it. But also, to kind of back up a little bit, that goes into building that relationship. So that way, when you send this email to the producer, they know, okay, Matt's good for it. He does really good work. I've been following him for a long time. So I know that his story is going to be breaking news, and I want him on the show. So that's something to really keep in context, keep that in mind as you're pitching stories, that you want to have that relationship already established before you're just sending links to every story that you do.
Shanta, it sounds like you've spent your career on the producer track. Have you had colleagues that have transitioned from producing to on air, and how did they make that transition? Do you know anyone that's done that, or Kim or Nicole, anyone who you know who's, I know Nicole, you started off air. Anybody know anyone who's made that transition? It looks like that's of interest.
Well, I would say it kind of goes back to the organization as well and how they're structured. You know, at CBS, we have a number of off-air reporters, but who do both. You know, maybe they primarily, for instance, we have a whole set of journalists who are digital reporters. And so they, for instance, on the campaign trail, shot and put out, you know, their own material they wrote for the web. And so again, based on their stories, based on their reporting, they also were able to get on the air depending on the nature of their story. If they did have a big scoop, or if, again, in the instance of having a streaming network, you know, we have a lot of programming dedicated to politics. So there's always an interest of what stories we're breaking, what stories we're reporting. But equally, I have seen producers at our own network, but also elsewhere who also have made the transition. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's just your reporting and what you know. And I think it also depends on your interest, because we certainly have some people who are producers who can go back and forth, who, you know, can be on air, but who still produce, and they're fine with that. But then you also have people who aspire to be on air strictly, you know, 100% of the time. So I think it depends what your interest area is. But again, I think to the points that we raised earlier in the panel, because of the intersectionality among media now, you know, I think anything is game for anyone. You know, for me, I'm having to kind of do things in reverse and learn more about, you know, posting stories online, you know, which is stuff I hadn't done since college, and, you know, being able to report for radio, which is something I did early on in my career. So I think the broader skill set you can have, no matter where you're working, you know, you can translate and kind of be able to pivot between on air, off air, again, depending what your ultimate goals are.
And I'll just add to that. I don't know many people who have transitioned, but I know people who can do both, because they have those skill sets, to Nicole's point. One thing, when I first started way back in the olden days, when I first started, people really wanted to put you sort of in a category, like you're the booking producer, or you're the segment producer, or you're the host, or you're the reporter. Nowadays, everyone does all of those things. And I would really implore anyone who is thinking about getting into journalism to definitely make sure you find someone, you know, your person, or you ask for the opportunities to be trained in every single facet of what you're doing, because it's seriously, it's like a no holds barred sort of situation now, where opportunities will come and you have to be ready for them. And the best way to be ready for them is to make sure that you're cross-trained in whatever it is that you have an interest in doing, because then you are available for that opportunity. If you're not trained, your colleague who said, all right, I'm going to do the editing, or all right, I'm going to take the journalism class to be on air, all right, I'm going to, you know, sort of shadow this host, will be the one to get it, because they went ahead and took the opportunity to be cross-trained. So cross-train, have your skill set. So no matter what opportunity comes up, you're ready for it, especially if that's something that you're interested in.
Wow, key takeaways there. Really quickly, I do not want to monopolize the time, because I know we don't have much of it, but we got a question asking to talk about my background. So really quickly, 10 years in the business for me. I started out in what I think New York City folks consider upstate New York, but what real upstate New York folks in Buffalo, Rochester, just say an hour and a half outside of New York City, is not upstate New York. That's where I was a reporter for a few years. Then I was an anchor in Burlington, Vermont at the CBS affiliate. And then I had the opportunity to come back and work for Spectrum News again, started my career with Spectrum in New York, and then worked in their DC bureau from 2018 to last year, mostly covering Kentucky politics, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, Kentucky congressional politics from a DC perspective, and filing primarily for their Spectrum's Kentucky station, but also my stories were landing on Spectrum stations across the country, but always had an eye for politics and everything that I did. I wasn't ever a State House reporter, but I always had an eye for politics. So you almost have to always be confined to the job title you have, but do the job you want to do. And so always along the way, whether it was being an anchor in Vermont and really pushing to do interviews with Bernie Sanders and Senator Leahy, political interviews, or in upstate New York, doing Monticello, New York, making sure that I had newsmaker interviews with lawmakers in that region, I think led me on the politics track. So thrilled that while I was at Spectrum, had some high profile moments with Senator McConnell that got on the national radar. And that is how I ultimately landed at CNN. I want to move to audience questions now. Janelle Nichols has a question for Kim. Janelle wants to know, Kim, and this is actually, I don't know this either. Do you aspire to perform other roles in media, or is production what you enjoy and want to continue to do? So do you want to be on air?
No, when I first graduated college, I think like most people, I wanted to be a reporter just because that's the only role I really knew. I feel like everyone always sees reporters and anchors. But the first job I landed was a producer. And I really enjoyed making those type of decisions, editorial decisions that go into being a producer. And then also across the board, there aren't that many African-American producers and not a lot of African-American female producers or news directors. And so sometimes you really got to fight for stories. And if there's not someone that looks like you, the fight doesn't happen. And so that's something that I really enjoy doing. And so I think for me, I like being in the editorial role than being on air.
Yes. Kim is a mover and a shaker. She is on the management track. She's going to be all of our bosses one day. Very, very key. Thank you, Kim. Kelly Barber asks, does anyone have any advice for people who do not have a background in journalism? Personally, I have a background in political science, and I'm now working as a prosecutor. How would I begin the path of becoming a political correspondent? Very interesting. Shanta, can you take that one?
Sure. So I've been talking about transferable skills all night long. And just because you don't necessarily get your degree in one thing doesn't mean that you can't do another. So to the points that have been made tonight from Kim, saying, record yourself and start seeing how you would be on air, or posting something on Instagram if it's a politics video, things of that nature. Start there, start networking, to Tolu's point of, networking with the right people, finding those folks and building those relationships to find the people like, hey, I would like to be on your show one day. What is it that I need to do? What is the best advice that you can offer for me? And then to Nicole's point, don't ignore local, start local, go on local shows once you've made those connections and build from there, and just take every opportunity that you can to build your reel, and then also of appearances, and then also, take the opportunity to do podcasts, to do local television, and then someone, because we're always looking, if you build those skills enough, someone's always looking for fresh talent who brings a different and, again, more nuanced perspective to issues, and you will be found, but you have to put in the work on your side in order to do the networking and to do the work to get on air so we can find you.
Other thing I would just chime in real quickly with too is, again, this goes to knowing networks and understanding organizations, because most networks have specialized analysts. So for instance, if you have a legal background and that's your strong suit, then maybe you pitch yourself as a legal analyst or a law enforcement analyst or a political analyst, again, depending on what your specialty is. So that's another way, at least, to get your foot in the door. The second thing I would say, to Shanta's point too, is, again, in the era of citizen journalism, everybody can do this job now. I mean, look at the proliferation of podcasts that are out there. So that is another way, maybe you have your day job in a certain profession, but on the side, you do a podcast. I mean, my cousin, she's an accountant and she's got her own little fun podcast on the side. She does it more for fun, but, if you're like really serious about getting into the game, that is also a way to, if you're able to build a following, get some buzz. I mean, look at this Three Brothers podcast. Nobody knew about it till Eugene Goodman, the Capitol Police officer, gave them an interview. So, if you can get a newsmaker on your podcast, or you just have a lot of interesting content, that is also a way to get a producer or a network's attention.
Yes, yes. Oh, I like this question to Tolu. How do you best respond to a question or a prompt you may not be knowledgeable about while on air? Tolu, what do you do?
I've been there. It can be a little awkward, but I would like rewind the tape a little bit and talk a little bit about what happens before you go on air, before you are called and booked to go on air. A lot of times producers will give you an opportunity to know what you're going to be talking about. Sometimes they'll ask you to send in talking points. They'll give you a chance to practice because they want to know what you're going to say, and you want to know what you're going to say, and you want to know what you're going to be asked. So there is a lot of back and forth that happens behind the scenes. And if that's not happening, feel free to reach out and say, I'm going to be on this show. I'm going to be talking about my story, or I'm going to be talking about news of the day, but give me a sense for what is going to be going on in the news. That helps, and that will get you some of the way. But sometimes there's breaking news. Sometimes there are things that happen while you're on air. Sometimes the host decides to do its own thing, do his or her own thing, and ask a question that you might not be ready for. One thing is that you can pivot back to your strong points, pivot to the talking points that you're comfortable with, and kind of steer the question back and still answer the question, but steer it back into more comfortable terrain. But also don't feel afraid to say, that's not something I'm aware of, or that's not something that I feel. You don't want to say you feel uncomfortable talking about it, but you may just acknowledge the fact that that's not necessarily where your reporting lies. It's okay to do that. It's better to do that than to try to wing it in a way that will be very, very obvious to people who are watching. So you can definitely pivot and steer the question back to an area where you're much more comfortable. That happens on TV all the time. If you watch any politicians, they are skilled at not answering the question directly. You can do it in a more artful way and still answer the question, but do it in a way that you're comfortable with. If it is a direct question and it's just something that you're not aware of or you're not comfortable with, feel free to say that, and then still make a point, still talk, and don't just end the quote there. Still talk about what you want to talk about and get your point across, because it happens all the time on TV.
Tolu hit it right out of the park on that one. Absolutely right. And if you're in a panel format and you're all sitting around the table, you can make a really brief point and then gas up one of your colleagues. Say, my reporting is not in this area, but my colleague Tolu has done some excellent reporting on this. And it's an easy transition if you're not comfortable with the subject matter. You know what, Shanta, this might be a good question for you to speak to sort of producer dynamics. It sounds like this person, an anonymous attendee, has like maybe some thorny dynamics with their producer. How would you handle working with a producer that is biased in terms of your place in the rundown and the stories he or she decides to run for a particular show? What would you say to that person?
Sure. And I guess I would want to ask the person what they mean by bias. So I'm just going to answer it kind of in a general way. Do know that there's a structure and a hierarchy to shows. So a producer may not necessarily be biased to where you are in the show's rundown. That actually is sort of done by senior producers, executive producers, and people on the leadership staff. But if you are having an issue, let's say with a particular producer, I would say you can pitch your case and say, look, I know about something that, has not come out yet. It's going to come out the morning of, something of that nature. Or if you have something even extra special to add to the story that you feel would make it better and should, push it up in the rundown, you can definitely plead your case and pitch your case to the producer. But I will say it's not necessarily going to change where you are in the show, because again, the producer can fight for you, but it's not ultimately very often the producer's decision where you go in the show. So I would say I would like to know, and you can email me a little bit more about the bias so I can answer your question a little bit more directly. But barring pleading your case and, sort of noting something extra that you might be able to add to the story, usually you're not going to get it moved. Rundowns are set for a reason because it's all about timing. And, the producer is doing the best job that they can to make sure it goes and gets in the show. Because the thing that I want you to know is that just even getting into the show is a big deal. So even though you might be lower on the rundown than you want, you're still in the show. And that's the battle right there. That's the win.
I would add, if this person is able to pitch themselves to another show, maybe try that. If you have a really great story and you feel like the 5 o'clock show doesn't like it, maybe Saturday morning loves it. No one wants to work Saturday morning, but if you're the lead and it's a great story and you start to get yourself out there, then maybe that's what you have to do. So that might be an option too. Again, without knowing all of the dynamics, maybe that's an option.
So we are all out of time for questions, but there is a tip sheet in the chat that you can refer to. And I really encourage you to follow up with every single one of these. This is a star-studded panel. So please, please, please follow up with these folks and stay in touch. We talked about networking this evening, how it isn't just, reaching out when you need something, but maintaining relationships, also important. We're gonna go around rapid fire, just 15 seconds or less. Maybe start with Nicole, just your closing remarks really quickly.
Well, 2 quick closing remarks. And again, well, maybe 3, because this is important. When you're on a show, know the length of time, keep your points concise. On a longer format, it's okay to go a little longer. But second thing is, I know we talked a lot about producers and being in touch with producers, but again, on the network level, especially if you aspire to be on more regularly, most networks have a talent division where they strictly recruit talent, and that's kind of where the contracts are done. So you also, it would be in your better interest to get to know who those people are and reach out to them. And those are also good people to get feedback from, because they can tell you exactly what their particular network is looking for.
Thank you. Kim?
I would say persistence is key. So keep sending as many pitches as you can. Send it to the producers, to the guest booker, to the EPs. When you meet people, when you network with them, really follow up with an email and really keep in contact and be persistent, because that's going to be your best bet. If you don't fight for yourself, nobody else will.
Awesome. Shanta?
I would just add to that, make sure when you are ready to pitch someone and you are being persistent, have your pitch together. Do not send half-baked pitches. Do not send 10,000 links. Be very specific about what it is that you are pitching to the producer. Like you, they have a lot on their plate and they definitely want to have you on air, but they don't have time to read through a 3-page email. So be specific, tell them what you can add, and definitely keep in touch and keep networking. You may not be able to get on for that piece that you've been doing, but you may be able to get on for the next one. So be heartened that we do see these things. We do want you on, and just be persistent in the fact that we are looking for new voices all the time, and just make sure those pitches are tight and that you send them in a timely manner, because you can't get on today when the show has already aired. So just make sure you have everything together and send it to the producer and continue to network as much as you can.
Tolu?
Just quickly, as a newspaper reporter on a TV panel, I'll say something really quickly about imposter syndrome, which I think addresses some of the questions in the chat, sort of about looks and finding your voice. Confidence is incredibly important, and it translates on TV, whether you have it or whether you don't have it. And it's something I've dealt with, as someone who didn't have television training and who has kind of had to learn kind of as I go. And I think showing that confidence and having that confidence, obviously doing the work to back up that confidence will really help you. It'll help you if you are not comfortable necessarily with maybe how you look or with certain things that you have, or with your voice. Hearing yourself often, can shoot your confidence, but sort of taking the time to build up that confidence and not really allowing that imposter syndrome, especially for Black reporters. Like all of us on this panel and a lot of the people in the audience, just knowing that you're supposed to be here, you're hired for a reason, you are good at what you do, and coming into the room with confidence, coming onto a show with confidence will really translate and it'll really take you very far. And don't allow, the doubts that enter into your head because of a number of different reasons, because you're the only one who looks like you in the room or whatnot. Don't allow that to trip you up. It's so easy for that to happen, but you really own your story, own your reporting, it'll really take you pretty far, and it'll translate on television and radio and on all the hits that you do. So that's the word of the day for me, is just sort of be confident and know that you're supposed to be here, and that you're you are on TV or on radio because someone called you and wanted you to be there, and that's a good sign of where you're going to be.
Thank you, Tolu. And I would just say, don't give up. Don't give up. Persistence is key. I've been told many times over my career that I wouldn't make it on air. And it's really a dream come true for me to be at CNN now. And if I would have listened to the naysayers and the folks who didn't think that was possible for me, and not listen to my own heart and journey, I wouldn't be where I am today. So please, folks, do not give up. That is it for us tonight. I want to thank NABJ and the Political Task Force under the leadership of Tia Mitchell for getting us together this evening. The Political Task Force has a general body meeting on Tuesday, February 1st, featuring White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Corinne Pierre. RSVP information is on the tip sheet, and that tip sheet is in the chat. So again, on behalf of NABJ, thank you all so much for being here. Have a good night. Thanks for being with us.